SQL within the cloud, or how your job might be different from working on-prem to working in the cloud. If you or your company wants to change your environment, then don't be afraid about your new tasks, new skills, or whatever there is, because there's nothing special in there. There are no real differences between your SQL Server on-prem and your SQL Server in the cloud, and I will show you how or why. So let me start with a short introduction into Azure. What is Azure and what you have to expect from there? It's about the Azure ecosystem, which consists about, or you will be in touch with some terms and words and topics all around the Azure ecosystem, which comes along with all your way in the cloud, or if you get in touch with training, learning for this Azure SQL systems or Azure SQL databases, you will regularly listen or reading those topics. There are accounts and subscriptions, which means you have an account which you're using to log on into Azure, and there is something like a credit card, which is the so-called subscription, which is your billing address, like something like this. And after you got your account and a subscription, or you registered for this and entered all your data, you will enter the Azure portal. The Azure portal is the main thing in Azure where you can see all those services, where you can deploy stuff, where you can see your monitoring and so on. I will show you later this. And if you are in the portal, you have the marketplace where you can choose all those different services, all those offers from different solution companies or suppliers, where they show you which product you can deploy on Azure in a predefined solution within Azure. Then there are APIs and CLIs. CLIs as a command line interface, which you can use to administrate or change, maintain all those stuff which you have deployed in the Azure cloud. All those APIs and CLIs are communicating with the Azure Resource Manager. The Resource Manager is the underlying, I would say in a native way, it's some kind of the hypervisor or the underlying infrastructure service, which knows which service has to be deployed on which server, which rack, which data center, and so on. And as I said already, data center and regions all over the world, Microsoft provides us a lot of different regions in different continents, different countries, and they had set up there a lot of data centers which are isolated from each other, that you can choose, for example, for availability groups or availability sets. I want to deploy all my services in 3 different data centers, availability zones, so that you can decide where you want to, or you generate a little bit more high availability within your services. And as already mentioned, you also can monitor all your services within the portal. I will show you this later. And with monitoring, all those SLA compliance and trust stuff comes together within the portal. You can see there. It's all things are put together in the security center within the Azure portal. I can show you this later. So, but this was a short introduction into Azure. Now we are coming to Azure SQL, which means I want to introduce you to all this stuff or all those services which Microsoft provides us for managing or operating your SQL Server databases within the cloud. So first, there is the Azure Virtual Machine, which is the best for you, or the easiest way to migrate a on-prem SQL Server virtual machine, hardware, whatever, into the cloud. So you're just making some kind of data center migration. You get your virtual machine with SQL Server on it and put it from your on-prem environment VMware, Hyper-V, whatever, into the Azure data center, which is in your region of desire or of which you have chosen, which might be the nearest to your company or to your customers. So you deploy a virtual machine there or migrate your on-prem virtual machine there. So there are different ways to get a SQL Server virtual machine into Azure. But with Azure SQL virtual machines, there are really no differences. So I want to talk to you later on or within this session more about Azure SQL Managed Instance as a service where you don't have a virtual machine, but you deploy a SQL Server instance where you can put your databases on, but you don't have to care about the virtual machine underlying, or you don't get access to a virtual machine or to some stuff you don't have to care about. For example, about patching the virtual underlying operating system, so don't need any patch days or downtimes for maintaining your operating system. So Azure SQL Managed Instance is the nearest service which you can get into Azure, which is nearest from regarding compatibility, feature sets, and so on, which is nearest to a virtual machine. So Azure SQL Managed Instance, if you want to have a complete instance, then this is what you have to choose. Next, and the most popular thing around this is Azure SQL Database, where you have just if you have your application and your application just wants to have a single database, or even if you say, for example, Citrix or virtual or VMware just needs to have 3 databases, then you can put those databases into an elastic pool within Azure SQL Database, and you can handle those within an elastic pool, and you don't have to care about a SQL Server behind it. You get just the database as it's named in the topic or in the service. So let me show you this. What I already mentioned here is, let me show you how it looks in the portal, what we can see here. Starting in the portal, if you are logging into the portal, you can see here, this is the starting point within the Azure portal, portal.azure.com, where you log in, you have your account here, and this is what you see if you have already deployed several services. So then we can see here we have Azure SQL, and by clicking on Azure SQL, we are stepping into all those services which are already deployed under this topic Azure SQL, or within the category of Azure SQL servers. And as you can see here, I already have deployed some machines here or databases here, and we can see this is my Azure SQL VM, for example. Then I have a database which is named Stack Overflow. Then I have a SQL Server. You can see that on the icon or in the resource type column here. This is a SQL Server. And I have another database, Data Geeks demo for today, DP900 DemoDB. There is a managed instance here, and you can see all those informations around it, where I have deployed it, on which subscription, means all the fees which are, or if I run a SQL Server database in the cloud, Microsoft will calculate some fee on it, and I have to pay for it, and they are the bill is going against this subscription, which means it goes to one dedicated credit card or billing department, so or project. How you or your company is has structured all those subscription. If your company is also able to get different subscriptions or several subscriptions under one account or one tenant, which means you can, for example, structure them. Each department get its own subscription, and then you can divide all those billings or all those costs which running in a month can be divided into each department or project or location, whatever you wanted to do there. So if I want to choose a new SQL Server, then I click here on Create, and you can see here is the first deployment option where you can choose. How do you plan to use the servers? So you can see here we have Azure SQL databases. So you're getting here a single database or an elastic pool or just a database server. But then you can question yourself or question me. If I told you you just get one database, why I have to choose a database server, or why I have to deploy a database server? This server is just an IP address, just a DNS name, or in SQL Server language, it's just a listener. So you are just deploying a DNS name for your application to enter it into the connection string where you can use it to connect or to tell your config to tell your application in the configuration. This is your connection endpoint for the database. And under that database server, under this listener, you can deploy your single database or your elastic pool. Second box here is the single SQL managed instance where you can deploy a single instance. And if you are within the preview feature set, you can also deploy a pooled managed instance, but this is not GA, so don't talk about it right now. And then you can choose here SQL virtual machine, where you can see you can deploy a lot of things depending on which operating system, which distribution of, for example, Linux distribution here, which version you want to deploy, bring your own license, each edition which is available for SQL Server. So there are a lot of things you can choose from already prepared for you to have an easy deployment. But as I want to show you here is I want to deploy a SQL Server database so I can get through those information you were needing, and I want to talk to you, or I want to talk to you about some stuff within the deployment which might be different from what you are knowing already from on-prem. So after you prepared your deployment within the preparation phase before you want to deploy, you have to gather all those information which you might have to know during deployment. So there is a database name which you might have chosen. Then already said here, I have already a Data Geeks demo SQL Server here, or you can just create a new one, and you have to enter a account and password, account name and password, and the location where you wanted to deploy this server. As you can see here, I already having a SQL Server endpoint where I can connect to, and I can, for example, give them a name to. This is my new name for the database. Then they ask me what I wanted to do is just a single database or an elastic pool here. And then this one might be the hardest question to answer, how much power you need or how much performance you need for your database. So you might have, Microsoft provides us some tools, some scripts to examine our on-prem environment before migrating them into the cloud. And they are giving you a short or a best practice recommendation, which might be the performance class, the performance tier you have to choose here. As you can see here, if you deploy a Azure SQL database, you have to choose between virtual core-based purchasing model or DTU-based purchasing model, where you have general purpose, hyperscale, business critical, basic, standard, and premium. DTU is a database transaction-based purchasing model. That was the first model introduced by Microsoft for Azure SQL databases, which means you can choose here in the basic service tier between you're just getting 5 DTUs, which means 5 data transaction units. I will explain what a data transaction unit is later on here. And you can choose from 0.1 means 100 megabyte to up to 2 gigabyte for about €4.21, which are about $5 a month. So this is just for developers or students just to try out or to test what is this Azure SQL, or you might just doing some basic testing on it without a lot of data here. So this is the basic model. Then we have standard, where you can say here you have those sliders where you can choose how many data transaction units you want to have here within the standard, which means standard for workloads with typical performance requirements. And you get, or you can choose what you want to have in data max size or data storage capacity for your databases. You can choose here also from 100 megabyte up to 1 terabyte. And you can see if you put those slider up to the right, you have to pay about €4,000 a month for this database, which is compared to your on-prem environment not that much as it's already sound, because you're getting a lot of stuff and additional services around this Azure SQL database, which you can benefit from in your operating system or operating processes, because you get a within this service which you are deploying here, you have included already memory, you have security included, you don't have to care about backup, regularly backups. Threat detection is already enabled on these machines or on these databases. There is a monitoring included and all those stuff, and the SLA from 99.99% uptime. So if you compare, for example, the SLA on 99.99 with your on-prem environment and what you have to deploy in your own data center to reach a 99.99 SLA, then you know that the costs are not that high as, or this €4,000 are not that much high compared to your regular costs in your own environment. So as you can think about here, memory premium is for more I/O intensive workloads. You can choose here also up to 4,000 DTUs, and then you can choose here for 4 terabyte. And you can also choose here in the premium level that you have read scale outs, which means you have a secondary endpoint where you can choose, as you already know from always on availability group, where you have a readable secondary. This is something like that you have. So in the background, Microsoft does not just deploy one database for you, but a synchronous copy in another data center region or data center zone within one region. And then you have a secondary listener to that zone, and you can leverage all your application read operations to this read scale out machine, similar to always on availability group. And you can choose here to make it more high available if you want to deploy your databases zone redundant, which means that there is additionally even more database copies within the chosen region So they are doing some more stuff with your data, spreading it within the region so that it is even more high available. So this was DTU, transaction data transaction unit based purchasing model. Then we have the vCore model, because a lot of customers complained about, we don't understand what is DTU and how to calculate it, and it's not that easy. So Microsoft said, okay, we want to provide you with the vCore model that might be easier for you or for the customers to understand. So compared to your on-prem environment, in this case, you're getting 2 virtual cores, and you can put the slider up to the other end, and it might, you can increase your virtual core settings to up to 80 vCores. And as you also can see here, we have 1 terabyte or down to 1 gigabyte to up to 4 terabyte. This is the highest point, or the highest amount of data which you can put in here in the general purpose model. And as you can read here, you have 1 terabyte log space allocated to your database, which means this 1 terabyte or this quarter of your max data size is the transaction units the transaction log size, which can be used maximum here. So, and you can choose here, maybe eventually if there is another generation 6 or 7 which might come up in the future, you can choose here and change it from that core, that Intel core to, for example, to a US Intel core generation. So this is based on the hardware which is available in your region or data center. Then depending on the purpose here, it's just general purpose or business critical. You can see here also up to 80 vCores, and then also up to 4 terabyte. Read scales are also available within the business critical, and you can see that is not that cheap. But if you think about the underlying infrastructure which might be deployed in your own data center, this is a underlying system is likely some kind of 2 to 3 node always on availability group throughout several data center regions, so that you can have a really high availability within this operating. So, and if I apply this configuration, you can see it here. It's saying it's business critical, general 5, 80 vCores, 4 terabytes, and so on. Then you can choose here backup storage redundancy. This means Microsoft provides you or takes care of your backup, which is already included within this service, and you don't have to care about. You can choose here, I just want to have my backups just in that region where I deploy it, in this case, East US 2. Or I want to choose it as a zone redundant backup storage, which means, yeah, it still stays only in East US 2, but they take care of that if one data center crashes, your data or your backup is still available in another data center, which should not crash, for example, in a thunderstorm or something like this. And by default, it is set to geo-redundant backup storage, so Microsoft takes care of your backups. Might be or should be replicated to another region, so that if, for example, East US 2 crashes completely all data centers within East US 2, then your data might be available in West US 1, 2. I don't know what is the twin of the storage twin of East US 2. So you don't have to care about your backups, which I will explain you later. So networking, which might also be a new topic for you within, or all DBAs have to think about or have to are in touch in some kind of taking care of your network, underlying networks. In this case, you just have to choose here during the deployment if you want to allow all Azure services to contact your database in this case, which means that the back end or the backbone infrastructure of Microsoft Azure is allowed to access your database or give a connection to allow a connection to your database from, for example, if you deploy a Azure Data Factory or you are deploying a web app and you don't have to to allow dedicated connection between web app, this new Azure service to your database. If you say put this one to yes, as it is already grayed out here, which I already said there, then the web application or your Azure Data Factory is already allowed to connect to your database. If you put it here to no or configure it to no, then this is not allowed and you have to take care of this connection on your own. Then you can see here at current client IP address, if you set your database to a public endpoint or allow deploy an additional public endpoint to your database, then you can set here that you want to add your current client IP address already into the network security group or into the firewall, so you can connect directly. Or the hole in the firewall is already there, so you can connect that. So if I click here on yes, it will enter my local IP address. So this is already enabled. This is Azure Defender for SQL. This is the first month is for free, as it is not really a general available service already right now. But this means you have advanced threat protection, all those Azure security things around virus detection and so on, which might be already enabled within the service. Additional settings, you want to, here you can choose if you want to deploy already existing data, or you might want to choose from an existing backup. So I can choose here, for example, I want to choose my Data Geeks demo backup, which is from 12:49. Yeah, 12:49 this morning. If I want to deploy this new database, I can choose this as the source for this new database. But I don't want to. For demo database, for demo purposes, here you can also choose sample, which means Microsoft will provide you the Azure AdventureWorks LT database for the usage here. Then the last one is tags, where you can, for example, put in created by project name. This is cost center number, so XYZ, or this is department project, whatever you want to have there in there, you can put it in there. It's just a key value pair, which might explain why this service is or who's responsible for this service. And then the last click here is review and create, which shows you whatever you have chosen within your deployment or in your configuration step. So I don't want to press create here because I already have some databases here for this. So this is the first introduction into Azure Portal, how to deploy a Azure SQL database. The process for deploying an Azure managed instance is nearly the same. Some differences between those items within security or how to deploy. So let me switch back to my presentation. This was the first introduction into this, and I just want to show you a comparison or a short listing of what you get depending on you are coming from, or comparing infrastructure as a service, which means you're deploying a virtual machine with your SQL Server on it, or deploying a platform as a service as Azure SQL Database. Here, business continuity means here in this case, BC enables your business to continue operating in a phase of disruption, particular to its computing infrastructure. Microsoft is taking care of the underlying infrastructure and takes care that your database will be available 99.9%. Then, according to 99.99, high availability of Azure SQL databases guarantee your databases are up and running, as I already said, 99.99. And you don't have to worry about any downtime or maintenance windows for the underlying operating system. Microsoft takes care that your database will be available. Depending on your chosen performance class, which you have chosen here, you will get in the general purpose, you will get 2 read replicas, for example, for the managed instance, or if you deploy it as a business critical, for example, you will get 3 replicas, 1 read scale replica, and zone redundant high availability, and so on and so on. So there are some differences in the details of deployment. Automated backup, as I already mentioned here, and I will explain it in some slides later here. Microsoft also takes care of your backups. If you deploy a Azure SQL database or an Azure SQL managed instance, Microsoft is responsible for your backups and will do those and will provide you some restore mechanism so that you can be that you are able to restore your databases up to a second. They are taking backups regularly within the day, so I will talk about that later. It's a weekly full backup, a daily differential, and during the day they are doing transaction log backups within a period of 5 minutes up to 15 or 20 minutes. If you need for legal requirements a long-term backup retention, which means that you have to provide or to store your database backups for up to 10 years, then you can choose then you have to deploy an additional storage account in Azure and can enable long-term backup on your databases so that Microsoft in the background enables a copy job from your from your database storage backup into the long-term retention storage. Geo-replication, if you want to distribute your database from one continent to another, or from one region, East US to West US, then you can enable geo-replication by just 3 clicks or 4 clicks in the portal or running a PowerShell script. Scaling, which is also available in infrastructure as a service, but then your downtime might be even longer if you choose compared to Azure SQL Database. You can scale your database up and down during the day several times, depending on your chosen performance class. Might be taking up to 5 minutes, might be taking some hours, because Microsoft is doing some cloning of your database, doing some backup restore, some mechanism in the background. So it might take some time to scale. Advanced security, as I already mentioned, within this service, you have a lot of security features also enabled. Versionless, you just get Azure SQL Database. That might be not that optimal for you or your application, but this is how Microsoft deploys your Azure SQL Database. You just get the service Azure SQL, and you can't choose, I want to have a SQL Server database on 2017 or 2016. You just get the newest version. Yeah. So it's versionless in that it's called versionless. So then built-in monitoring, as I already said, I will show you this later in the portal again. And built-in intelligence means there are some features around Azure SQL Database which enables you to, for example, to force plans, or Microsoft recommends you some additional index building or creating additional indexes where you want to even choose from just recommend them, or just not even recommend, but create them on your own or automatically. So purchasing model, I want to explain. DTU is, as I already said in my demo before, or I'm showing, if you say I want to have the 10 DTUs or 20 DTUs, then you will get a dedicated number of compute power and a dedicated point of storage underlying the system. Compute means here some kind of compute power from your CPU. So for example, if you choose S0, which means 10 DTUs, you just get 0.1 10% of a vCore, and that amount of RAM is then even that small. And if you choose, for example, 400 DTUs, then you will get for a comparison value of for vCPUs. Compared to the DTU model, this is independent scalable. If you want to have 2 vCPUs, you will get a ratio of RAM combined to your vCPUs, and you can leverage your slider within the storage. So this is the DTU model is pre-configured, and in the vCore model, you as an admin or responsible person for the deployment, you can choose from many more values here. So let me come to the main differences between on-prem DBA and cloud DBA, what you have to learn additionally to your already knowledge, or your built knowledge on what you have learned already. So setting up and configure network security. Thank you, Microsoft, for this slide. Azure SQL Database. If you want to deploy a Azure SQL Database, then you can choose from an additional option within the deployment process. You can choose, for example, from between no access to your database, from a public endpoint, so that you can access your database through the internet, or you can choose I want to have an internal IP address which comes from my own virtual network within Azure. Then you have to provide a private link, so you can put your database within your own network environment. If it's not possible to provide a private link, then you might have to set allow access to Azure services to off, configure the firewall rules according to your needs, and then configure virtual network rules. So you get access to the database. If you're having an Azure SQL managed instance, it's nearly the same configure. Or if you deploy a managed instance within your environment, you also will get within the deployment, you already get a complete virtual network and a subnet for your application and your managed instance, and you have to deploy, you have to configure that virtual network and those security groups according to your needs, so that you have to follow, or it is recommended to follow network standard practices here to enable the connectivity. But the Microsoft documentation on this topic is really good. Network connection, as I already said, I assume that we have an Azure account, we have a subscription, an Azure AD, and we have to deploy a resource group, which is just a logical combination of services here, some kind of a folder, for example, you can deploy it, name it like this. Then you have to deploy, or if you deploy a Azure SQL database, you have to this DNS name, aka SQL listener, with your SQL database beneath. So you can deploy as I already said, without any access. So you have to deploy afterwards some connectivity things to this, or you can choose the internal connection or the public access. Both is possible here. If you want to put it into your own virtual network, you have to deploy the private link here. This is what I already mentioned before. And according to the documentation and security best practices, you have to deploy if you want to deploy a Azure Firewall service, it is a separate service which you can deploy within your virtual network. Or the easier thing is to deploy a network security group, which is a minimum small kind of easy configurable firewall thing within there. So security tasks and capabilities for your Azure SQL database. If you deploy Azure SQL databases, you have Azure Active, or you can use Active Directory authentication, role-based access and logs, which means not everybody is able to delete your database, or not everyone is able to delete your server, or not everyone is able to deploy your server. This is the rule-based access within the Azure portal. You can enable auditing, data encryption, data masking, which you might already know also from your on-prem SQL Server. This is also available within the cloud. Security task, as I already showed you within the deployment process or in the slides before, set up and configure network security, data protection, setting up some firewalls, network security groups, configure security center, Sentinel eventually, which is an AI featured security service within Azure. And then you can configure authentication and authorization compared to your on-prem SQL Server. Monitoring security, as I already said, there is the feature here in the portal. You can see, you can search for its security center here. Where Microsoft shows you that I have here, I've got, for example, 5 subscription, there are 23 assessed resources, and they show you, for example, here that my secure score is not that high, and I have to, or they recommend me to increase this value by using these recommendations, for example, here. Yeah. For example, my Azure SQL databases here have a public endpoint within the internet, which is not recommended because, you know, security attackers are able to scan those ports and find those machines, and it's not that secure. So you have to take preventions for that, which are shown here. So back to the slides. Monitoring and troubleshooting performance. You can find Azure monitoring metrics, alerts, and logs within the portal. Your already known dynamic management views are also available within your Azure SQL database, not just in your virtual machine, but also managed instance and your Azure SQL database. Extended events are also available there. Lightweight query profiling on by default, query plan debugging with set statements. Query store is on by default, so you can use the query store on your databases, or Microsoft also relies on those data in the query store to recommend you additional indexes or deleting indexes, dropping indexes. Performance visualization in the portal. Like this. For you. We have here our SQL Server databases. For example, I just tried to I have them here on that server. You can see this is my server, my listener. And on this listener, I have two databases, Stack Overflow 2010 here. And you can see here, there is already workload on this machine, as you can see here. And this is how my workload is on this database, and I can take a look into this. You can see here during the night there was nothing, and just here over lunchtime there was a peak. I started my script to provide the workload, to run the workload. Then you can see here during or just before my session, I started the script again. And then you can see here the Microsoft recommendation DTU consumption is really high. Yeah, it's up to 100%. I have heavy workload on there. And then you can see here, you can even dive deeper into your queries, find which query is running long, or which is taking up that data IO, log IO, duration from that query, and so on. This is how you can dive into your monitoring data. So this is, as I already said, the automatic tuning within Azure SQL Database, and you can see those also, as I already showed here. You can see here there is no recommendation for another index, but you can see here the recommendation is please provide me more power. For example, here it's a standard S3, 100 DTUs. So increase your pricing tier, performance tier from S3 to S4, S5, or whatever, to provide or to get more power for your database, or increase or decrease the runtimes of your queries. Backup and restore, as I already said, you can see here, Microsoft takes care of your backups and provides you some possibilities, opportunities to point-in-time restores. Microsoft takes full database backups once a week, log backups every 5 to 10 minutes, depending on your workload or your data change, the rate of your changing data. So differential backups every 12 hours. So this is how Microsoft provides you the possibility to point-in-time restores. Just let me mention this topic here. Backups retained, depending on the performance class which you are deploying, you get a backup retention from 7 days to up to 35 days. So if you need more time for more retention time, more than 35 days, then you have to enable long time retention backups with an additional storage. Microsoft also provides backup integrity checks within this backup process. You can restore your database or your backups to a new database. As I already said, long-term retention of your backups, geo-restores if primary region goes down. This is the deployment option, which I showed you, local redundant storage, backup storage, zone redundant storage, and geo-redundant storage is this opportunity here. Restore backup of deleted databases. So if you not just deploy the listener, you just drop your database, then you are able to, or Microsoft provides you the possibility to restore your deleted database. If you are on a managed instance, Microsoft also takes care of your database backups, and you have just the option, the opportunity to do a manual copy-only backup to wherever you want to. So I just crashed my presentation. Sorry for that. Next one, maybe the most important thing you should learn in the future is PowerShell, or some scripting language, for example, like Bash or something like this, it is recommended to use. If you want to use infrastructure as code, then you should use most ideally PowerShell for this, or Azure Command Line Interface. Microsoft provides you a command line interface within the portal, or you can use whichever scripting language you want to use here. For example, I have it here. Give me a second. I use Visual Studio Code, which here you can see I just run my workload generator here, and you can use Visual Studio Code for deploying your services, maintaining your services, administrating your services. So this is the opportunity to do this. So, and last but not least, like this, let me show you. It's just a SQL Server, and I showed you a lot of things within the portal, but I have prepared also the Management Studio, which you all might know from on-prem environment. And you can see here, there are just normal connections deployed here. This is my Azure SQL database server, my listener, and you can see here that these are my both my databases I already deployed there. Then I have a local SQL server here. This is a Linux Docker container where also I have AdventureWorks 2017 and the Stack Overflow database deployed. And then you can see here I have the managed instance with public endpoint. Just move here. This is a local account here, and I also have the opportunity or possibility to use a domain account like this from the Azure AD. Yeah? So I'm able to also use my normal AD account within the portal or in the Azure AD where I have deployed them. So conclusion of this thing is that I have told you before that Azure SQL is nothing special, no real differences. It's just a SQL Server. And if you want to prepare yourself for this stuff, to deploy or to learn more about Azure SQL, Microsoft provides you not only those great certifications around Azure or Azure SQL database or Azure Data Platform. You can find those Microsoft Learn topics, links. You can choose the Azure SQL workshops provided by Anna Hoffman and Bob Ward. You find a tool or a helping tool to provide your or to choose your performance class which you have to choose for your SQL deployment. Even the Azure SQL documentation is great. And if you want to learn more about Azure, you can also watch Anna and Bob on Bug and so on. A lot of MVPs there providing YouTube videos. This is the link to the Data Exposed YouTube channel. If you have later on, if you have question, you might contact me within my, or you can read in my blog. You can contact me via social media or LinkedIn or something like this, and I will provide the presentation and those links later on in my blog. So you can download those there, and I just want to show you in the last seconds that I have prepared here, for example, the Azure SQL Fundamental, where you can choose the learning paths and do some exercises, read those things. And we have certifications. Microsoft starts with DP 900 or AI 900 and something like this. Those are all those fundamentals, providing some stuff, basic stuff within the portal or learning, beginning learning for your journey into the cloud. So this is what you are getting within the links. So this is the end I'm just over 1 minute. Evelyn, it's your turn. Thank you for having me. Thank you to listening to me. And it was a pleasure for me.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. We very much appreciate your session.